Welcome to Your Voice Dorset podcast. I'm Luke Graham, and today I'm joined by Councillor Millie Earl, the leader of BCP Council, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Hello, Millie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good today, thank you. We had quite a long full council meeting last night. We didn't get out until nearly midnight. So,
Wow.
Yes, it was quite a lot of discussion. I think about 4.5 hours in the end.
That seems intense.
Yes.
And this was the budget agreement, I think?
Absolutely, yeah. So every council has to set a balanced budget. That's pretty much the one really important thing that they do. So me and my colleagues in Cabinet, we were presenting ours. And then we have amendments from opposition parties, which are debated and voted on. And eventually we came to the point where we voted on our final budget. And I'm really pleased we've got a balanced budget, but it's not the ideal budget for residents.
Yeah, the big thing that came out of this budget obviously was the council tax rise. The council tax for the BCP area has gone up by 6.74%. You did at one point apply for a 7.5% increase. Do you want to talk about why that was necessary to increase the council tax?
Yeah, absolutely. So local government and councils, no one's surprised to hear that there's a lot of funding pressure. We hear about it on the news when it comes to things like adult social care, but also SEND services, children's services. Costs are rising a lot. What we weren't expecting, though, was when every year we get what's called a revenue settlement, so money from government to support our services. And we were notified of ours in December, and the government had done a big review into the money that they give to local councils. And unfortunately, we were one of the councils that lost quite heavily. So because of that drop in revenue income from central government, we've had to find other ways to fill that gap. And we could have gone down the route of cutting services, closing libraries, closing parks, taking lifeguards off the beach and things like that. But instead, we strongly believe that those are services that people value in their community. They're really important to our community well-being. So we applied to government for an uplift for their approval to be able to raise council tax above the 4.99% limit.
And what are some of the big ticket items that are coming out of this budget? What are the big changes people can expect from this new balanced budget?
Well, I think what's really important is that we are able to continue a lot of the services that we want to see in our communities. And in fact, a lot of other councils aren't in that position. I think I counted that about 35 have had to apply for additional support. So basically go ahead from government to sell their assets to fund their revenue. So I'm glad we're not in that position. We're not having to sell our assets off to make the books balanced. But what we have been able to do is really get the basics right in BCP across our three towns. We've seen over the years of former administrations and actually, over a decade and a half of austerity, a lot of services have been reduced or cut completely. And we've also had services which have been in really dire a really dire state that have been in need of major improvement. So things like our children's services, for example. What we've done is focus on getting the basics right, being able to bring those services into a place where they are delivering for residents. And I'm really proud now. We've got a much better rating on our children's Ofsted, so that was good. We've come out as the top social housing regulator grade, which I'm really, really proud of. And we've been able to do things like prevent families having to be in bed and breakfast accommodation. A lot of councils can't say that. And also things that we've wanted to do for a really long time, like introduce food waste in Poole, deliver our residents card, and really tackle some of the issues with empty shops on our high streets. So there's a lot that's going on with BCP Council, but our finances continue to be a real struggle.
Of course, and this is obviously an issue across the country. It's not unique to BCP struggling with finances in that way. One area of finances worth talking about is around SEND, around special education needs and disabilities. Why did BCP develop such a large sort of debt? And the government this week announced some reforms. How are those going to help?
Yeah, so this goes back to a policy from over a decade ago now, which was to provide children and young people with the education and care that they needed really to get on in life. The problem was that there was no plan on how to fund those reforms at the time. And government told councils that they could spend the money on delivering these services that children are legally entitled to. However, we would have to hold that as a debt off our books. And what's happened is over the last decade and a half, we've seen that rise and accumulate more and more, which has placed a lot of pressure on our general fund budget, because what we're seeing is to hold that debt, it's costing residents £10 million a year. So, these debts are astronomical. They are eye-watering. We're talking by the end of our term, it will be about 380 million, and that's a low end guess. So I was really pleased when government announced that they would be funding 90% of it. They recognised that this wasn't something that councils should bear the burden of because it was a government decision in the first place. However, that still leaves us with potentially somewhere around £40 million to pay at the end of government then taking responsibility for delivering those services away, or the cost of those services away. In terms of the wider reforms, though, we really shouldn't lose sight of the fact that even though this is impacting council finances, it's about families getting the support that they need for their children. And I feel really strongly that needs to be at the centre of these reforms, making sure that we do have a viable system that is both affordable but is also going to properly provide for parents, because I speak to parents all the time who have been dealing with the SEND system, having to go to tribunal, having to fight tooth and nail for their children just to get access to what they're legally entitled for. And it is a real struggle for those families. So my ask of government, and what I think these reforms will hopefully lead to, is a system that works particularly for families, but also has a way of being sustainably funded. And I think we've got the bones of that here. For example, our mainstream schools are really good. I would like to see more families being able to get the support that they need within their mainstream schools, for example. And I'm keen that we support government with finding a way forward.
That's great. What are some of the other sort of big issues you see facing BCP at the moment?
Well, as I came in, one of the reasons why I had to delay this interview was because we had floods in our area a couple of weeks ago. And I think that speaks to the wider issue about infrastructure across our three towns, and actually across Dorset and in some other parts of the country. So, as a council, one of our roles is crisis management. And a couple of weeks ago, we had people having to be evacuated from their homes because of the floods. We have a lot of concern around our harbours as well. We are just working with the Environment Agency to put in about £36 million of investment into creating more flood defences around Poole Harbour in particular. But I think it has a wider issue around the future of development in our area. So I'm also not just leader of BCP Council, but I'm the portfolio holder for planning and regeneration. And when we're looking at the government figures for housing, we're going to have to build 3,000 homes a year, every year for the next 15 years. Now, I look at places where we've got severe flooding. I look at our cliffs that are not stable in a lot of cases, and at our rivers and so on, which flood regularly. And I'm really worried about where those houses will go. So, I'm, as someone who has lived in Poole my whole life, there are a huge number of issues around housing development in particular, and being able to access housing or a good quality housing. But we need to be tackling it in a sustainable way that doesn't put people at risk of future flooding.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was incredible, the floods recently, wasn't it? It was slightly terrifying. Speaking of Poole, the area you're from, the area you're a councillor for, there's been lots of regeneration in that area recently. There's the Poole Museum's just been finished its refurbishment. How are those kind of projects going in Poole?
So I'm so proud that as not just a Poole councillor, but as a Poole resident, I was born in Poole, I've lived there my whole life. I am so pleased to see a lot of the work that we've been doing in Poole, particularly around, you're right, those regeneration projects, particularly around heritage and culture. So we've just put £12 million into updating the museum there, along with grant funding, and creating an old town which people want to go and visit, like a real destination. I would say to residents, it's so worth a visit down to Poole Museum. There's some real nostalgic items in there. There's loads about the history of our area, and of course it's got a really rich history as quite a historic town. And of course Scatman's Court is opened up now, and that's got things like a medicinal garden, lots of activities for children across the two sites, and it makes a really good day out. And I'm so proud that Poole is a real up and coming place. We've seen our footfall figures consistently rise. We're seeing it above average in terms of occupancy rates for shops. People want to go to Poole, and that just makes me really proud as both a resident and a councillor.
Yeah, it's exciting to see these kind of changes happening. Some of the other changes BCP councillors proposed have been a little bit more divisive, I think is a nice way of putting it. Do you want to talk a bit about the plan for the new town councils in Bournemouth, Broadstone and Poole? Yeah,
absolutely. And this was something which was a political priority for us as Liberal Democrats, and something we were elected to deliver. Really, it's looking at our places across Dorset and seeing the brilliant work that town and parish councils are doing. So the only places in Dorset not to have town and parish councils are Bournemouth and Poole. We wanted to change that. I feel that we've missed out a lot in our areas. You only have to look at places like Highcliffe, where the town council are major funders of the food festival over there, and they get 35,000 visitors to there each time. Or over in Christchurch, where they've got just stunning Christmas decorations and Christmas lights, and have big events around, turning on the Christmas lights, that real community stuff. And other councils, I always look at places like Corfmullen, who deliver youth services through their town councils. These are things that we have lost because we are a unitary council. We have pressure in our statutory services. And actually, I think we've lost a lot of the democracy of it as well, because Bournemouth, Poole and Broadstone, they have very different identities. And if you ask residents where they're from, they'll tell you if they're from one of those towns, rather than talking about it as an area. And I feel that it's really important that those residents in those individual towns and parishes have the ability to have the say over particularly those community things that they want to see delivered in their areas. So for me, this is about equity. It's about delivering something which puts us on a par with those places that are thriving with their town and parish councils. I'm really excited to see what they can deliver.
What's the timeline on those town councils? How close are they to happening?
So the elections are actually taking place in May this year for town councillors. I would really encourage people to consider standing for their town council or getting involved. They are going to be absolute leaders on those community projects that we miss in our areas, and I think they're going to do a really good job.
Taking a step back, you mentioned obviously you're from Poole originally. How did you get into politics?
So I grew up in the ward that I represent, and in fact, I've lived there my whole life. I really, when I was a teenager, I was looking around at my community. I represent Newtown Heavlands, which is north of Ashley Road in Poole. It's quite a deprived community, and it was very obvious to me that there were very different standards of living, very close together, and that for me, I felt wasn't very acceptable. And we see it across the whole country now, this lack of equality in terms of our access to housing, our access to services, our education options and so on. So for me, that's where my passion for changing things came from. And as I grew older, I started getting involved in community. In particular, I opened a community fridge in my area to try and tackle some of the hidden hunger and prevent food from going to waste. I also got involved in like a community recycling program and put on events in my area, and really wanted to translate that into something that would have bigger outcomes. So I stood for election in 2019 and I was elected to represent my ward, which I'm really proud of. I love the fact that, you know, I'll walk down a street and see someone who I went to school with or cross over the road and, you know, I know my neighbours really well. I think, you know, having that connection to my community has been really beneficial for me in being that representative. Since I became leader, though, I've realised that our whole area is made up of very similar communities. People do just want the best for their families and for their areas. And it's been really lovely to get to know different areas and different communities and be able to serve as the leader of the council.
You became leader in 2024 after Vicky Slade was elected as an MP. How have you found the switch from a regular council to a council leader? How did you find the job?
So I did have a slight step up because in 2023, when we took control of BCP Council as a 3 towns alliance, Vicky made me her deputy leader. And then a year later, obviously with the result of the general election, it was brilliant to see Vicky Slade elected to Parliament. I would say that it is a huge step going from being an opposition councillor or a councillor who's dealing with ward issues only to actually having a much more strategic role and something that's much broader. I honestly can say it is the most rewarding job in the world, but it is challenging as well. I think not just because of local government finance, but balancing, you know, the needs from different communities, being able to make sure that our services are delivered well. And also, like I said earlier, getting the basics right for residents so that they are actually getting value for money from their local authority.
It does seem quite a challenging job. I mean, the BCP Council in particular seems a little bit combative, maybe is fair to say. You've got councillors who called the budget plans madness at one point, the Reform councillors, and yeah, it seems a bit of a tricky job.
I like to describe us as politically dynamic. We have 11 council groups, which is unheard of. You know, most councils will have 2, possibly 3 council groups. With 11, it does make for some very colourful politics. But I actually think that it does add a level of additional scrutiny and accountability and debate. And I think those things can only be good for democracy, actually, when you have lots of different views shaping policy and being able to make sure that it is the best that it can be.
And obviously you have to make tough choices in the role as well. I mean, we covered a lot about the Air Festival cancellation last year. I mean, obviously necessary for a variety of reasons, but how do you deal with that, you know, trying to make unpopular decisions?
It is really difficult. And I completely understand, you know, the frustration that residents have and that I have, that we often see services that we really value disappear because of, you know, government over here making cuts or priorities over here around care. What it says to me, though, is that we should have a proper overhaul of how funding is done in local authorities. Our councils weren't built to support, you know, multi-million pounds of care costs and so on and deliver that level of care where, you know, we've got the NHS that fund healthcare from the other perspective with very little democratic oversight. So I think that councils do need a bit more of a focus on what they are, what they need to provide. And something like the Air Festival, I think, was a really good thing for our area. Unfortunately, it just was not financially sustainable, particularly with the rising costs of insurance, of security, some of the new laws around making sure that it's a really safe event, made it just something that was unviable. We did go out and look for additional sponsorship or for a private company to take it on and deliver it, but no one else could make the numbers work either. And don't get me wrong, you know, I grew up with the Air Festival. I do really enjoy it. If there was a funder out there or someone who wanted to come and deliver it and underwrite those costs, we would really love to have that conversation.
Great to hear. You mentioned Vicky Slade was elected as MP. Would you like to be an MP? Is that an ambition, or you want to stick with the council?
So when I was elected into local government, I was, for me, it was the local side that I really am passionate about. As someone from our area, I feel like I have that really good understanding of residents and residents' needs, and also the kind of the history of the area as well, both from a political sense, but also the way communities have changed over the years. And I often think about whether I would want to be a member of parliament. Personally, I don't think it's for me, not least because I'm not sure about travelling to London so much. I'm one of those people who likes to be able to go around a corner and know what's going to be there, and have my ear to the ground and so on. And don't get me wrong, I think Vicky Slade, for example, does a really, really good job at raising residents' issues. But it's not something that I think will attract me anytime soon. To be honest, being leader of the council, we've got elections coming up in 2027. One of the really good things is that we've had a stable administration for the last 3 years. And I think if you change leadership and so on, it causes instability in your council. And I wouldn't want to do that to residents.
That's great to hear. Looking ahead then, what are some of the future plans for the council? You talked about the residence cards. Tell us a bit more about that initiative.
Yeah, so the residence card, again, is something as Lib Dems we've been prioritising. The idea of it is, as a resident of an area that's primarily got a real tourist industry, we often feel like we get stung by things like higher parking charges, or maybe crowded beaches and so on. And it can get a little bit frustrating that we are the ones having to foot the bill for a lot of costs that are actually coming from elsewhere. So what we wanted to do is design a residence card, which is basically a discount card or a benefit card for people who live in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So we're going to include in it 4 main elements. Residents will be able to get a free swim at one of our leisure centres every month. They will be able to get an additional hour on parking in our surface car parks in the town centre. We'll also have discounts in various shops or cafes or local businesses that want to be a part of this project. And also we'll have a 10% discount on things like coffees and ice creams from our seafront outlets, our kiosks. So I think those perks will really will be beneficial to residents to have that feeling of being able to get something back from what they give in council tax, and also what they contribute to the community. And in the future, we want it to grow. For example, we want to be able to use it to reward some of our amazing volunteers. We want to be able to use it to drive more people into visiting our town centres and so on, with additional perks there. And also to raise health and well-being across our population. So I think there's lots of elements that it can really be a fantastic project for local residents.
And how will people get the card? Do they have to apply online, or what's the process?
So we are currently looking at launching it in the summer. So residents will find out how they can get their hands on one, whether it's a physical card or a digital card. We're hoping we'll have both options. So I would say keep an eye out for any more news on it.
That's excellent. And do you want to talk a little bit about Bournemouth Town Centre as well? There's, we get a lot of comments online on articles. There's people who really like the area, other people who have some issues with the area. Do you want to talk about how the council is managing the town centre? Yeah,
absolutely. And town centres have really struggled across the country, and we've seen some that are absolutely thriving, particularly where they've got town councils. But there are a lot of places that are really struggling, especially with the shift to things like online shopping and the change in the way we approach retail. But I do have a huge amount of hope for our town centres locally. Like Poole and like Christchurch, we know that they offer so much for residents and for visitors, both in terms of their history, but also what they've got in terms of retail, things to do, museums, castles, all sorts. Bournemouth Town Centre is slightly different, and we need to approach it in a slightly different way. And I know that there is a lot of concern around the town centre, but I'm really excited about, for example, a project we're running called the High Street Rental Auctions. So that is powers that we've been given from government to be able to take over things like shop fronts and reanimate them. So where you've got a landlord who isn't making use of their shop, their retail unit, it effectively gives us the power to come in and say, well, if you're not making the most of it, we're going to auction it off to another business, or we're going to let it out to the community for some real social or cultural value. So we've applied it to Bournemouth Town Centre. It does take a little while to get to the point where we can really start negotiating with landlords, but it's hopefully going to be a bit of a wake-up call for those who are sitting on those empty units. And I think if we can bring some of those shop fronts back into use, and with some really quality offers for people, then we'll be able to drive more people into the town centre.
That's very exciting. One issue that was a big issue last summer was around parking as well, and the council tried out new powers. It was kind of like an experiment, wasn't there?
Yeah.
How did that go? How did that parking trial go?
So we've been asking government for years and years to raise parking fines. Not many people know, but they've actually been frozen since 2008 at £25 or £35 if paid within 2 weeks. And what that means is actually it's not a particular incentive for people to think, well, actually, maybe I shouldn't park here and should go and park in one of the car parks. So I'm sure you've seen the pictures up on the East Cliff and the West Cliff in the summer. People just park on the pavements, they'll park on roundabouts. It makes things really dangerous for pedestrians who are having to go into the road. And it also causes major traffic jams in our area. Absolute chaos. So we've been asking government to provide us a proper incentive to be able to tackle that. And last summer, we were given the go-ahead to run a pilot of higher parking fines. And we've just published recently the data from that and what we were able to find. It definitely changed behaviours. People were not so likely to go and park in a way that was obstructive or illegal or dangerous. So we're now calling on government to allow us to have a longer trial to show how it works across different weekends, different weathers and so on, because it was only for a month in August. And the other option is actually to expand the trial even further across other places in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, which also suffer from really poor parking in the summer. Ultimately, I think it's quite an easy win for government to raise parking fines a little bit higher than they have been, so that it does provide a proper incentive to people not to park in such a disruptive way.
That's great. Something we ask all of our guests is, what does Dorset mean to you? And we can adapt that to be, what does Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole mean to you?
Well, I'm glad you've said Dorset, because I do consider myself a Dorset resident. I absolutely love where I live, and I often look at our fantastic beaches and our gorgeous wildlife-rich heathland and all the brilliant things we have to do in our area. And I think, why would anyone want to live anywhere else? And I think for me, it means home, because it's where I've grown up. It's where I've lived my whole life. I've had friends who have relocated. I've had family who have moved away. But I can honestly not see myself going anywhere. The idea of that kind of scares me a little bit. And I think it's because I identify so much with our area. And I'm really proud of the place and the role that I get to do in making it even better.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Millie. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for listening.